She was 8 months pregnant. She was sitting on the floor of her closet, and she had just found something in her husband's jacket pocket that changed everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Not a receipt, not a note, not a lipstick stain on a collar, a champagne cork, the wrong brand, from the wrong event, from a night he said he was somewhere else. Such a small thing, such a quiet, ordinary, devastating thing. In 1 hour, her husband, one of the most powerful men in the city, would be standing at a podium in front of 300 people, talking about integrity, talking about legacy, talking about everything he had built. What he did not know was that his pregnant wife was about to put on her coat and get in a car. What he did not know was that she had planned every detail of that gala herself, from the flowers on the tables to the angle of the stage to the bench by the window where she would later sit and decide the rest of her life. He had told her to stay home. He had been very gentle about it. He had kissed her forehead, and she had almost believed him. This is the story of the night Margaret Calloway Ashford walked into a room she had built, and walked out of a life she had outgrown. This story is for anyone who has ever made themselves smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who you should be. It is about the moment you remember who you were before, and the quiet, unglamorous, completely life-changing work of becoming her again. If this story speaks to you, stay with us. Leave a comment below telling us the moment you knew. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Every like, every share, every kind word helps us reach the woman sitting in her own closet right now, wondering if she is brave enough to get up. She is, and so are you.
The closet smelled like cedar and dry cleaning plastic and the faint ghost of Conrad's cologne. Maggie sat on the floor and could not get up. That was the simple truth of it. She had lowered herself to zip her evening shoes, and now she was stuck. 8 months pregnant and stuck on the floor of her own closet at 6:47 in the evening, while the gala she had spent 4 months planning started in exactly 1 hour and 13 minutes. She was not going. That was the official story. Conrad had explained it 2 weeks ago at the kitchen island, both hands wrapped around hers, voice warm and reasonable. The doctor said no standing for more than an hour, he had said. It's a 4-hour event. You'll be miserable, Maggie. The staff knows what to do. You've planned everything already. Stay home, rest. He had kissed her forehead. She had nodded. She had told herself he was right. She had been telling herself Conrad was right for a long time now. The shoes were champagne-colored. She had bought them before the pregnancy, back when her ankles were the same size they had always been, back when she was still taking client meetings and driving herself to venues and carrying sample books up 3 flights of stairs without a second thought. She could not zip them now. The left one had rolled under the hanging rack, and she was reaching for it when her hand found something else, a jacket pocket. Conrad's tuxedo, the one he wore 2 weeks ago to the Blackwater Foundation preview dinner. She always checked pockets before the cleaner. Old habit. From the years before, when she ran her own business and every process had a system, and there was nobody else to catch the small mistakes. She reached in, a champagne cork. Wire cage still attached, the kind that came off a bottle, opened with intention, not accident. She turned it over in her palm. There was a brand name pressed faintly into the side. She had to tilt it toward the light to read it. It was not the brand served at the Blackwater dinner. She knew that because she had approved the liquor order herself. She had been at that dinner. She had sat 3 seats down from the foundation chair and smiled at the right moments and eaten the salmon she did not particularly want because it was the only thing on the menu without shellfish. She turned the cork over again. Her first thought was, there is an explanation. Her second thought arrived right behind it, quiet and certain. I know there isn't. She did not cry. She did not feel very much of anything yet, just a specific kind of cold, the kind you notice after you have already been sitting in a room with an open window for an hour. The cold was already there. You just did not know it until now. She set the cork back in the pocket. She sat on the closet floor for another moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. Dot Calloway picked up on the second ring. She always picked up on the second ring when it was Maggie. Never the first. She said the first ring was for composure. "Tell me something," Maggie said. "I'm watching a documentary about crows," her mother said. "Did you know they hold funerals?" "For who?" "Each other. When one of them dies, the others gather around it and just stand there. Scientists think they are processing the danger, learning from what happened, figuring out what it means for their own survival." Maggie looked at the champagne cork sitting in the pocket of her husband's tuxedo jacket. "Mom," she said. "I know," her mother said. They were quiet for a moment. The documentary played softly in the background. Something about crow intelligence, crow memory. "There is a car downstairs," Maggie said. "I think I am going to that gala." Her mother was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Wear the navy," Dot said finally. "The champagne washes you out." Maggie almost laughed. She put her phone in her lap and looked at the row of Conrad's suits hanging in front of her. Charcoal, navy, black. The tuxedo with the wrong cork in its pocket. She had organized this closet herself when they moved in. She had bought the cedar inserts and the matching hangers and the small velvet hooks for his cufflinks. She had organized everything in this life, and somehow she had ended up on the floor of it. She reached for the shoe under the rack. She pulled it toward her. She looked at it for a moment, then she put it on. She could not zip it. The ankle was too swollen. She put it on anyway and stood up very slowly, one hand on the shelf. And when she was upright, she stood there for a moment, breathing through her nose, the way the midwife had shown her. In for 4, out for 6, the baby shifted, a slow roll against her ribs. "I know," she said again, to herself this time, or to the baby. It was hard to tell anymore where one of them ended and the other began. She went to the bedroom and stood in front of the full-length mirror, 8 months pregnant, 34 years old. The navy dress fell to her ankles, and the fabric was good enough to hang properly even now. Her hair needed pinning. She would pin it in the car. Her coat did not button across the middle anymore, but that was fine. She would hold it closed. She looked at herself for a long moment. She did not look like a woman whose world was ending. She looked like a woman who had somewhere to be. She picked up her evening bag. She dropped in her phone, her lipstick, her room key for the Wentworth Grand, the one she had negotiated, into the venue contract herself, a private suite for the host family, just in case. And she walked out of the bedroom and through the penthouse and into the elevator without looking back. The Ashford household car account was on her phone. Old habit. She had her finger on the app before she had consciously decided to use it. The car arrived in 4 minutes. The driver's name was Frederick. He had been driving for the Ashford household for 11 years. He had driven Maggie to more events than either of them could count. Tonight he did not ask where they were going. She said the Wentworth Grand, and he nodded and pulled into the evening traffic without another word. She looked out the window as the city moved past. The street lights were on. The sidewalks had that particular early evening quality, the moment between day and night when everything looks slightly more vivid than it should. A woman walked a dog outside a bakery. 2 men in suits stood outside a parking garage, looking at their phones. A child pressed her face against a restaurant window. Maggie watched all of it and felt the cold settling deeper. She checked her phone. No text from Conrad. She locked it, unlocked it, locked it again. He was already at the venue. That was the explanation. He was managing last-minute details. He was doing what he always did at these events, which was stand in the center of every room as though the room had been built specifically to hold him. She knew she was past the part where that explanation helped. She put her phone face down on the seat beside her and watched the city and breathed. In for 4, out for 6. The baby shifted again. I know, she said quietly. I know. The car stopped at a red light 3 blocks from the Wentworth Grand. Maggie picked up her phone. She opened the interview. Conrad had filmed it that morning. Local television, a morning news segment, the kind of polished appearance he had been giving for years. She knew his routine. 45 minutes with hair and makeup, 15 minutes of prep with Gideon Holt, his chief of staff, 5 minutes of stillness before they called action, which was not meditation exactly, but was the closest Conrad came to it. He was extraordinary on camera. She had always known this. She had watched him from green rooms and holding areas and back tables at 100 different events. She had watched audiences lean toward him the way plants lean toward light. It was not performance. That was what made it remarkable. He genuinely believed every word he said. She pressed play. The interviewer asked about tonight's gala. Conrad sat slightly forward, the way he always did when he wanted to project sincerity. Both hands visible on the desk. Voice warm and measured. Everything I do, he said, I do for future generations. The foundation exists because I believe that privilege comes with responsibility. Tonight is about honoring that responsibility in a very concrete way. He smiled. It reached his eyes. He did not mention Maggie. She had noticed this 4 months ago, the first time he gave a major interview without mentioning her. She had told herself he was being protective. Her pregnancy was not public knowledge yet. He was giving her privacy. She had told herself many things over the past year. The interviewer asked about his personal inspiration. My parents modeled service, Conrad said, and I've been fortunate to have people in my life who remind me what matters. People. Not his wife, not Maggie specifically. People. She watched his hands on the desk. She knew those hands, the knuckle on his left ring finger that had never healed quite right after a break in his late 30s, the way he drummed his fingers on surfaces when he was impatient, the way he held a pen with his whole fist like a child. She had loved those hands. She looked at them now and felt something shift in her chest. Not grief, not yet. Something more like recognition. She knew exactly who Conrad Ashford was as a public man. She had helped build that version of him. She had suggested the rural education angle for the endowment when the original plan had been urban infrastructure. She had redesigned the foundation's annual report the year before last, working with the graphic designer for 6 weeks until it said what it needed to say. She had chosen the centerpieces for tonight's gala. Low arrangements, eucalyptus, candlelight that let people see each other across the table. She had built the room. What she could not answer, sitting in the back of a car 3 blocks from the Wentworth Grand, was whether the man she had loved had ever existed specifically for her, or whether she had simply been the most competent person available at the moment he needed someone to build things. The interview ended. He thanked the hosts. He stood up and shook hands. The camera caught him in profile for a moment, moving toward the door, and in that fraction of a second before the cut, she saw the expression on his face. Not relief, not guilt. Just the neutral face of a man moving on to the next item on his schedule. She put her phone face down in her lap. Her phone buzzed. A text from Claire. You said you weren't going. Are you going? I see your account pinged the car app. Maggie looked at it. She typed back, I am going. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then Claire's reply came through. I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not go in without me. And Maggie, I never liked him. Not, I am sorry. Not, are you sure about this? Not, be careful. I never liked him. Something about those 4 words cleared a space in Maggie's chest, like a window pushed open in a room that had been closed too long. The air came in cold and real, and she breathed it. Her phone rang before she could respond. An unfamiliar number. She almost let it go. Then something made her answer. "Mrs. Ashford." A young woman's voice, nervous. "This is Nora Sable, from the event coordination team." Maggie sat up slightly. "Nora, what is it?" "I need to tell you something." Nora's voice was carefully steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed calm. "There was a change to the seating assignments this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Your place card was moved." "Moved where?" A pause. "To the back section, near the service corridor." Maggie was quiet. "Mr. Ashford's office authorized it," Nora said. "I wanted to call you right away. I didn't know how to. I just thought you should know, before you arrived." "Who specifically in Mr. Ashford's office?" "The request came through Gideon Holt's extension." Maggie looked out the window. The Wentworth Grand was visible now, its stone facade lit with warm gold light, guests moving up the front steps in evening wear. "Thank you, Nora," she said. "You did the right thing by calling me." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford. Don't apologize." "You didn't do anything wrong. I'll see you inside." She hung up. She looked at the building. The seating change was not the worst thing she had learned tonight, but it was the most specific. It was the most intentional. The champagne cork could be explained. The interview could be explained. A seating change executed 4 hours before the event through official channels could not be explained. He had not just been having an affair. He had been managing the logistics of her erasure. "Frederick," she said quietly. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford." "We're still going in." "Yes, ma'am, ma'am," he said, without inflection, without surprise, the tone of a man who had driven this woman long enough to know that her decisions were worth respecting. The car pulled to the side entrance, not the main steps. She had asked for the side entrance without thinking about it. She was protecting herself without needing to be told to. She did not examine that too closely. She got out of the car. The night air hit her, cold and clean with a thread of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. The sounds of the arriving Gala drifted around the corner, heels on stone, the low pulse of the band warming up inside, someone laughing too loudly at something that was probably not that funny. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She was 8 months pregnant. She was wearing a navy dress and unzipped champagne shoes and a coat that did not close. She had a room key in her evening bag and a champagne cork in her memory and 4 months of signs she had chosen not to read. She was also the most qualified person in that building to be here. She walked toward the side entrance. Claire was already there. Claire Mendenhall was wearing floor-length burgundy and the expression of a woman who had been ready for this night for longer than she had ever admitted. They held each other for a long moment in the small alcove just inside the side entrance. Not a polite hug, the real kind. The kind where you press your cheek against the other person's shoulder and hold on long enough to feel your own breathing slow. "You okay?" Claire said. It was not quite a question. "Not yet," Maggie said. "Soon." Good answer. They found a sitting area off the main lobby, away from the arriving guests. Claire flagged down a passing waiter with the practiced authority of someone who had attended enough of these events to know that waiters with past appetizers were always more responsive than those without. She set a glass of water and a small plate in front of Maggie. "Tell me," Claire said. So Maggie told her. The cork, the interview, the seating change through Gideon Holt's extension at 4 in the afternoon, the photograph she had not yet seen but already knew was coming. The way you know certain things before they happen. Claire listened. She did not say "I told you so." She had too much respect for the moment. When Maggie finished, Claire set down her glass and said, I need to tell you something. Tell me. I have known something was wrong for 8 months. Claire said it carefully, like each word was a step on uncertain ground. I didn't say anything, because you were pregnant and you seemed happy, and I was afraid of being wrong, and I told myself it wasn't my place. I have asked myself every single day since then if I should have spoken up sooner, and I still don't have an answer. Maggie looked at her. 8 months, she said. Yes. What did you see? Claire looked at her hands for a moment. The way he talked about you at the Hargrove dinner last spring. You were in the bathroom, and he was talking to Leonard Marsh's wife, and she asked how you were doing with the pregnancy, and he said, she paused. He said it was a complicated time. A complicated time. Maggie sat with that. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. A news alert? A society page? The kind that covered philanthropic events with the breathless attention usually reserved for celebrity weddings. Conrad Ashford arrives at annual Foundation Gala with Communications Director Sloan Whitfield. There was a photograph. The society pages called these candid, but they were never candid. They were staged with enough care to look accidental. Conrad and Sloan in the entrance of the Wentworth Grand Ballroom. His hand at the small of her back, her head tilted slightly toward him, both of them laughing at something. It was not a professional photograph. There was nothing in the angle or the body language that suggested colleague. Everything in it suggested exactly what it was. Claire looked at the phone. She took a slow, careful breath through her nose. Maggie did not cry. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said, "She is wearing Dusty Rose." Claire looked at the photograph again. "I wore Dusty Rose to every event for 3 years," Maggie said. "Conrad told me it was my color. The first event we attended together, he said it was my color, and I should always wear it. I kept wearing it because he kept saying it." Claire was very still. "He gave her my color," Maggie said. "It was not the hand at the back, not the angle of the head, not even the laugh. It was the color, the specific, precise thing that had been named as hers, and then quietly handed to someone else while she was at home on a couch, planning the event they were both standing in." "Maggie," Claire said softly. "I need 3 minutes," Maggie said. "I need to be alone for 3 minutes. Then I'm going in." She stood. She walked to the ladies' room she had always used at this venue. Not the main one near the entrance, the smaller one down the side corridor, the one with warm lighting instead of fluorescent. She had used this bathroom at every event she had planned at the Wentworth Grand. She had stood at this specific mirror more times than she could count. She turned on the cold tap. She ran the water over her wrists, both wrists, one at a time, letting the cold move up her forearms. Her mother had taught her this. Cold wrists calm the whole body. She had no idea if there was science behind it. It worked. She looked at herself in the mirror, 8 months pregnant, navy dress, hair still needing pins, eyes dry. She looked at herself, and she thought about the portfolio. Brown leather, monogrammed with her initials, that she had kept on the top shelf of the hall closet until last month when she had moved it to the nursery closet. She had told herself she was just reorganizing. She had not opened it in over a year. The last time she had opened it, she had been showing Conrad a layout she had designed for a corporate retreat years before they met. He had looked at it with genuine interest. He had asked good questions. Then he had smiled and said, "That seems like a lifetime ago for you." She had agreed. She had smiled and said, "Yes, it feels like another life." She had closed the portfolio and put it back on the shelf. She stood at the mirror now and felt the full weight of that moment for the first time. Why did I agree with that? She had not thought of her work as a previous life. She had thought of it as her work, her actual profession, the thing she was genuinely excellent at, the thing that had taken her 15 years and countless early mornings and difficult clients and one spectacularly failed event in her second year that she had rebuilt from and learned from and was better for. Conrad had called it a lifetime ago, and she had nodded. And then she had planned his galas. She had reorganized his foundation's public image. She had built the rooms he stood in the center of. The baby kicked, hard and definitive, right under her ribs. She put her hand there. I know what I traded, she thought. I told myself it was worth it. Maybe it was. That is not the question I need to answer tonight. The question tonight is simpler. What do I do now? She turned off the tap. She dried her hands on the small hand towel. She pinned her hair in 4 quick movements, the way she had done it 1,000 times before big events. She looked at herself one more time. Then she said, quietly, to the mirror, I am not crazy. I know what I saw. I have known what I was seeing for longer than I have admitted. She said it the way you say something when you need to hear it in your own voice, when you need the air in the room to carry it. She walked back to Claire. Okay, she said. Okay, Claire said. I am going in. Claire stood up. She straightened her burgundy gown. She picked up her evening bag. She looked at Maggie with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time to stand next to her friend in exactly this moment. Then let's go, Claire said. The ballroom doors were open. Maggie stopped just inside the entrance and looked. The room was exactly as she had designed it. That was the first thing. Not Conrad, not Sloane, not the crowd of 300 people moving through the space. In evening wear, the room. Navy and ivory linens on the round tables. She had specified that combination in October, overruling the venue coordinator, who wanted cream and gold because cream and gold was what they always did. Low centerpiece arrangements of eucalyptus and white ranunculus, candlelight at the center, clean lines, nothing that would block sight lines across a table. She had fought for those low arrangements for 3 weeks. The vendor kept sending her tall proposals with dramatic, cascading orchids. She had sent them back each time with a single sentence. The point of a dinner table is for the people seated at it to see each other. The stage was positioned at a 45-degree angle from the far wall, not parallel to it. She had requested that in the venue layout email in September. A stage positioned head-on to a rectangular room made the side tables feel like overflow. An angled stage included everyone. The venue coordinator had called it unusual. She had said she did not care. She had built this room. She looked at it now from the doorway and felt something complex and specific. Not pride exactly. More like recognition. The way you recognize your own handwriting on something you wrote years ago. This was hers. Claire touched her arm gently. They moved forward. Maggie knew people in this room. She had managed their table assignments and their dietary restrictions and their photographer access and their parking situations. She had returned emails at 11 at night about specific wine preferences and seating concerns and the correct pronunciation of a donor's name. Several of them saw her as she moved through the crowd. The surprise on their faces was information she did not need to examine right now. Helen Carlyle, a foundation board member with silver hair and a direct manner that Maggie had always respected, touched her arm near the first row of tables. Maggie, she said warmly, I didn't realize you were coming. You look wonderful. Thank you, Maggie said. I helped build this room. I thought I should at least see it. Helen laughed. A genuine laugh, not a polite one. She squeezed Maggie's arm and moved on. Claire leaned close. Conrad is at the bar, 10 o'clock. Maggie did not look yet. She let another few seconds pass. She looked at the centerpiece on the nearest table. Eucalyptus, white ranunculus, the candle flame perfectly still in the heated air. Then she looked. Conrad was at the bar. He was talking to a man she recognized as a major donor, a real estate developer whose name appeared on the third floor of the new children's hospital wing. Conrad was at his best in exactly this situation. Relaxed, posture, glass held loosely, head slightly inclined to show he was listening. He had explained this to her once, years ago, the mechanics of making someone feel heard. She had found it fascinating at the time. She found it clarifying now. Sloane Whitfield was 3 feet to Conrad's left, talking to a small group near the stage. Late 20s or very early 30s, polished in a specific way that came from having been told repeatedly that you were exceptional. Dark hair, good posture, the kind of ease that read as confidence from a distance. Dusty rose. The dress was a very specific shade, the exact shade that Conrad had pointed to on a color swatch at a department store 3 years ago, the first event they had attended together, when he had said with genuine warmth that it was her color, that he wanted to see her in it. Maggie looked at the color for a moment. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. There was no wave of rage, no dizziness, no moment of collapse. What she felt was colder than any of those things, colder and cleaner. She was not a monster, this woman. She was a 31-year-old who had been offered proximity to power and had taken it. She was not the main character of this story. She was not even particularly interesting as the other woman. She was just a person who had made a predictable choice in a predictable situation. The most interesting person in this story was the woman who had planned this gala from a couch and been told to stay home. Conrad saw her. It happened across the room. His eyes found her the way eyes find movement, reflexively, and there was a fraction of a second. She had perhaps half a breath to observe it, where his expression showed something unguarded, not guilt, not love, something more administrative. The expression of a man realizing the deadline had moved up without warning. Then he recovered. He was very good at recovering. He excused himself from the donor with a hand on the man's shoulder and crossed the room. He moved through the crowd the way he always moved, like the room had been designed around his path. He reached her. "Maggie?" His voice was quiet, controlled, the register he used when he wanted to manage a situation before it had the chance to become something. "I didn't know you were coming." "I know you didn't," she said. "You should be resting. The doctor said no extended standing. I'll sit down in 10 minutes. I wanted to see the room first." He looked at her. There was something in his eyes that she recognized but could not name. Not love, not cruelty. Something closer to the look of a person confronted with a version of reality they had decided to not consider. "This isn't the time," he said. "No," she agreed. "The time was probably months ago, but I wasn't invited to that conversation." He reached for her arm, just below the elbow, the guiding gesture. She had seen him use it 100 times with 100 different people, moving them gently in the direction he needed them to go. She stepped back, one small, clear step, the length of a breath. He let his hand fall. "I'll call a car," he said. "I'll call my own car," she said, "when I'm ready to leave." She turned. She walked toward the table where Claire was already seated, already watching, already holding a glass of sparkling water she had obtained with impressive efficiency. Conrad did not follow her. She noted that, filed it somewhere useful. She sat down. She straightened the napkin in her lap. She looked at the low centerpiece in front of her. Eucalyptus, white ranunculus, still flame. She had built this room. She intended to stay in it for as long as she wanted. Conrad did not follow her to the table. Maggie sat with that information for a moment, not dramatically, just practically. He had reached for her arm, and she had stepped back, and he had let her go. He had offered to call a car, and she had declined, and he had returned to the donor at the bar. He was managing the situation. That was all this was to him, a situation to manage. Nora Sable appeared at her elbow 20 minutes later, carrying a glass of sparkling water with both hands, like an offering. She was 29 and wore the anxious precision of someone who had been rehearsing this interaction in the car on the way over. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, "I'm glad you came." "You called me," Maggie said. "That took courage." Nora set the water down carefully. "I have been on your coordination team for 2 years. You hired me when I had no formal event management experience. You sat with me every Tuesday for 4 months and walked me through every system. You caught my mistakes before they became disasters, and you never once made me feel small about them." She paused. "I was not going to let you walk into tonight without knowing." Maggie looked at her. This was the version of herself she used to be, 29, and earnest and working twice as hard as anyone else in the room because she knew she had to. She recognized it with a specific ache. "Stay close tonight," Maggie said. "I may need a witness." Nora nodded. She looked relieved to have a task. The dinner portion of the evening began. Speeches were made. The foundation chair gave brief remarks. Then Conrad took the stage, and the room did what rooms always did when Conrad Ashford stepped up to a microphone. It leaned in. He was extraordinary. She had known he would be. She watched him from table 3 and thought, not for the first time, that his genuine belief in what he was doing was what made him so compelling. He was not performing sincerity. He actually felt it. He had built hospitals. He had funded school programs in counties where school programs had not existed before. These were real things. The room applauded. She did not. She was thinking about the Crow documentary, the way they gathered around the fallen one and stood there, processing danger, learning what the loss meant for their own survival, not performing grief, not making it about themselves, just standing and learning. Gideon Holt sat down across from her. She had not seen him approach. Conrad's chief of staff was 55 years old and had the carefully neutral face of a man who had spent 12 years managing a powerful person's schedule and knew better than to show reaction before he understood a situation fully. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, then, after a pause that held something in it, "Maggie." She looked at him. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it the way people said hard things when they had decided there was no longer any use in not saying them, flat and clear and without decoration. "I have known about Ms. Whitfield for 5 months. I was asked to maintain discretion. I want you to know that I am not comfortable with what that decision has cost you." The room continued around them. The speeches, the applause, the low conversation at nearby tables, all of it at a slight remove. "5 months?" Maggie said. "Yes. She has been in the communications director role for 8 months. He said nothing. "So 3 months before it became something you needed to keep discreet," Maggie said. "Or 3 months before you knew about it." He was very still. "Thank you for telling me," she said. She meant it. "I need you to answer one question honestly." He waited. She looked at him steadily. "How many people in this room know?" He did not answer immediately. That was the answer. She sat back in her chair. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate shift of weight against her left side. She put her hand there under the table, quietly, just to have contact with something real. "The hardest part," she said, and she was not entirely speaking to Gideon Holt, "is not the betrayal itself. The hardest part is being the last person in a room to know something that the room has known for months." He looked at her with the expression of a man who had run out of angles. "I am sorry," he said. "I believe you," she said. "I also believe it is too late for that to change anything material, but thank you for saying it." He stood up, he straightened his jacket. He looked at her one more time with something in his face that she did not have a name for yet. Then he walked back toward the bar. Maggie watched Conrad finish his remarks at the front of the room. The room applauded again. She picked up her sparkling water. She held it without drinking. She watched the man she had been married to for 3 years move through the crowd at the edge of the stage, shaking hands, inclining his head, smiling with his whole face. She thought about the word managed. She thought about a seating change made at 4 in the afternoon through official channels. She thought about 5 months. She thought about the 3 clients she had turned down in the first year of their marriage because Conrad had suggested, gently and reasonably, that her schedule was incompatible with the life they were building together. She had agreed. She had believed it was a trade, a fair one. She had gotten something real from this marriage. She was not going to pretend otherwise. She had loved this man. She had believed in what he was building. She had felt, for a while, like a genuine partner in something that mattered. At some point, without her noticing, partner had become logistics coordinator, and she had kept working, because it was what she knew how to do. The applause faded. The dinner shifted toward the cocktail portion of the evening. Guests began moving between tables, toward the bar, toward the small conversation clusters that formed naturally in the second half of these events. Maggie stood up slowly and walked to the far side of the room. There was a padded window bench along the east wall. She had specified those benches in the venue layout. She had argued for them in 2 separate emails to the event coordinator, insisting that large formal events needed quiet margins where guests could step back from the noise without fully leaving the room. She sat on her own bench. She looked out at the city. The lights were sharp in the cold night air. Buildings and streets and the ordinary ongoing life of a city that did not know and did not need to know what was happening inside the Wentworth Grand. She sat there for a long time. She did not look at her phone. She did not plan. She did not Google anything. She just sat on the bench she had designed into the room and looked at the city and let the information of the evening settle into her the way cold settles into stone. The baby moved again, steady and present. I know, she thought. I know. By 9:15, the formal dinner had completed, and the room had shifted fully into its second mode. Maggie used the mezzanine key. She had been carrying it since the venue contract was signed. She had negotiated it herself, a private suite for the host family, available from 6 in the evening through midnight. She had included it for exactly this kind of reason, though she had been thinking at the time of a different kind of need. A place to sit down with swollen feet, a place to nurse a baby in 6 months if they brought her to next year's event. She had not been thinking of this. She let herself into the suite and closed the door behind her. The room was quiet. The sounds of the gala filtered up from 3 floors below, muffled into something almost abstract. The band, the low frequency of 300 voices, occasional laughter. She sat on the edge of the bed and took off her shoes. The relief was immediate and physical. She had been in those shoes for 2 hours on swollen ankles, and she had not said a word about it to anyone. She lay back on the bed. The ceiling was white and smooth and unhelpful. The room smelled like clean linen, like the candle wax burning in the hallway sconces, like the faint cold air coming through the barely cracked window she had not noticed until now. From 3 floors down, the band played something slow and orchestral. She had chosen this band. She had requested they play nothing after 2012 because Frances Ashford, Conrad's mother, had once mentioned at a family dinner that contemporary music gave her headaches. It had been an offhand comment. Maggie had written it in her notes and acted on it 4 months later when she was booking entertainment. She had done that. She had written down what Frances said and remembered it and made a decision about it months later, because that was what she did. She paid attention to what people needed, and she built things that met those needs, and she did not usually require acknowledgement for it. But she had required acknowledgement. She had just not been honest about needing it. The baby shifted, a slow, rolling movement that traveled from one side of her body to the other. "Hi," she said to the ceiling. "I know you were there for all of it. I am sorry it was a lot." The baby moved again, something that felt, possibly, like a response. She put both hands on her stomach and held them there. Here was the question she had been circling since the car. The real one. Not about Conrad, not about Sloane, not about Gideon Holt's 5 months of managed discretion. Who am I now? Not who was I before. She knew that. She had the portfolio. She had 15 years of genuine skill and real knowledge and a reputation in her industry that still existed, that had not gone anywhere, just because she had stopped using it for 2 years. But who was she now? In this marriage, in this building, in this specific room, on this specific night. She had reorganized her life to fit Conrad's, and she had called it partnership, and she had gotten real things from it. She was not going to perform victimhood she did not entirely feel. She had made choices. She had agreed to things she did not have to agree to. She had deferred to his judgment about her own career, her own schedule, her own worth as a professional, and she had done it voluntarily. Not because he had forced her, because she had loved him and wanted to build something with him, and somewhere in the building, she had slowly stopped being one of the architects and started being one of the materials. She had done that. Not just him. Her. That was the part that hurt, in a way that had nothing to do with Sloane Whitfield. She lay on the bed, in the quiet room, and she said it out loud to no one. "If I do not have this marriage," she said, "I am still a person." The baby kicked, sharp and certain. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She sat up slowly. She put her shoes back on. She did not zip them. She did not try. She picked up her phone and called Walt Bergstrom. Walt had been the Ashford family attorney for 20 years. He had reviewed the prenuptial agreement before Maggie signed it. He had been pleasant and professional and entirely Conrad's attorney in her mind until approximately this moment. He picked up on the third ring. Maggie. Just her name, no surprise in his voice. Either he had been expecting this call, or he was very good at not showing surprise. Probably both. "I need a referral to separate counsel," she said. "Tonight, if you have a name available. Or first thing tomorrow morning, at the latest." A pause. The sound of papers moving somewhere on his end. "I will have a name to you by 6 in the morning. Thank you. Maggie." Another pause. The kind that held something specific. "There's a clause in your prenuptial agreement that I believe you should understand before you speak to anyone else. It addresses public conduct. Specifically, public actions that constitute humiliation of a spouse." It was standard language at the time. Conrad's previous attorney included it as a formality. She closed her eyes. "It works in my favor," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Walt said. "It does." She breathed through that for a moment. "Tomorrow," she said. "Walk me through it tomorrow." "I will," he said. "Are you safe tonight?" "Yes," she said. "I'm at the Wentworth Grand on the mezzanine level. My friend is downstairs. I am fine." "Good," he said. "Call me in the morning." She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed for another moment. She thought about the prenuptial clause, standard language, a formality included by Conrad's previous attorney. She thought about the photograph on the society page, the hand at the back, the dusty rose dress, 300 people in a room, many of whom had known for months. She thought about the word formality. She thought about a lot of things in a short time, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in a room she had negotiated into her own contract. Then she stood up. She straightened her dress. She repinned one section of her hair. She looked at herself briefly in the mirror above the dresser. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was standing straight, and her eyes were dry. She went back to the door. She went back downstairs. She called Claire from the hallway outside the suite. "I need 30 minutes," she said. "Then I am coming back down." "Okay," Claire said. "Why 30 minutes?" "Because I built that room, and I am not leaving before the auction." A brief silence. Then Claire said, "I am ordering you a cheese plate from room service. You are very good at this." "I know." She went back into the suite and sat by the window. The room service arrived in 9 minutes. She ate a small amount of cheese and several crackers and a few grapes, and watched the city through the glass, and deliberately did not think about Conrad for the entire duration. She thought about her portfolio instead. She thought about the 3 clients she had turned down in the first year of the marriage. One had been a nonprofit arts organization that had contacted her personally, by name, because they had seen her work on a previous capital campaign. She had written back and declined and given them the name of another coordinator. She had told herself it was temporary. She would return to full-time work after they had settled into the marriage, after they had figured out the rhythms of their shared life. That had been 3 years ago. She thought about the small office in the Garnet district, 400 square feet on the second floor of a building that smelled like coffee from the cafe below. She had loved that office. She had given up her lease 14 months into the marriage because the overhead was not practical if she was not taking clients. She had put the portfolio in the closet. She thought about all of it without anger. That was new. The anger might come later. Right now, she felt something quieter than anger. She felt like someone taking inventory before a move. There was a knock at the door. She set down the cheese plate and crossed to the door and opened it. Frances Ashford stood in the hallway. 68 years old, floor-length gray gown, white hair swept up with the practiced precision of a woman who had been attending formal events for 4 decades. Hands folded in front of her, the bearing of a retired judge, which she was not, though she had the same quality of contained authority. She looked at Maggie the way doctors looked at charts, not unkindly, just accurately. "May I come in?" she said. It was not quite a question. Maggie opened the door wider. Frances sat in the chair by the window. She looked at the city for a moment before she spoke. "I have wanted to say something for 4 months," she said. "My son told me it was managed. Those were the exact words he used. It is managed. As though you were a situation and not a person." "I see," Maggie said. "You were not meant to find out this way. I want you to know that. For whatever that is worth, at this particular moment, which I suspect is not very much." She paused. "I argued against tonight, against the photographs, against all of it. I told my son that what he was doing was not only wrong, but also tactically foolish, and he told me he had it handled." "He did not have it handled," Maggie said. "No," Frances agreed. "He did not." They looked at each other. "My grandchild," Frances said then, and her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, more deliberate. "Whatever happens between you and my son, I want you to know that I intend to be present in that child's life and that my intentions toward you personally are unchanged." Maggie studied her. "That would need to be in writing," Maggie said. "I expected you to say that," Frances said. "I have already spoken to my personal attorney. Not Conrad's attorney. My own. The documentation will be ready within the week." This was not warmth. It was not an apology. It was something more useful than either. It was a woman who had spent 40 years in proximity to power and knew exactly how to make things binding. "Why?" Maggie said simply. "Why are you doing this?" Frances looked out the window for a moment. "Because I know exactly what it means to stay in a room after someone has decided you are invisible," she said. "I stayed in that room for 22 years. I do not recommend it to anyone." The city lights reflected faintly in the window glass. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Frances reached into her evening bag. She set something on the table between them, a small black USB drive. "Gideon gave this to me before dinner," she said. "He would not give it directly to you because he does not know you well enough and he was uncertain of your reaction. He trusted me to make the decision about whether to pass it along." She looked at it. "I understand it contains correspondence between Conrad and several members of the Foundation Board regarding asset transfers and endowment restructuring over the past 18 months. Maggie looked at the drive. "Financial?" she said. "There may be more to understand here than the affair," Frances said. "I do not know the details. I do not want to know them. But I believe you should have them." Maggie picked up the drive. She turned it over in her fingers. It was warm from Frances's bag, small and unremarkable, and potentially significant. She thought about the prenuptial clause. She thought about Walt Bergstrom's careful voice on the phone. She thought about the word managed, about 5 months, about a seating change made at 4 in the afternoon by someone who believed she would not be in this room tonight. She put the drive in her evening bag. "Thank you, Frances," she said. Frances stood. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. For a moment, she looked like a woman setting down something heavy that she had been carrying for a long time. "I am proud of you," she said, "for coming tonight, for sitting at your table, for being in this room." She left. Maggie sat alone in the quiet suite and listened to the city outside and the faint sound of the band 3 floors below. Starting over feels enormous, she thought. But starting over is what I am best at. I have started from nothing twice. I know how to begin. She picked up her phone and texted Claire. "I am coming down now." Claire responded in 10 seconds. "The auction starts in 12 minutes. Your paddle is at your seat." Maggie almost smiled. She picked up her evening bag with the USB drive and the room key and the lipstick she had not reapplied, and the phone with Walt Bergstrom's number in the recent calls. She went back to the room she had built. The auction was already underway when she came back through the ballroom doors. The auctioneer was a tall woman with a dry wit, who Maggie had hired specifically because she did not treat the bidding as a performance of wealth. She made it feel like participation, like people were joining something rather than showing off. Maggie had sat with her on a video call for 45 minutes before booking her, asking her about her approach, listening to the way she talked about the events she had run. She was exactly as good as Maggie had expected. Maggie crossed the room. She walked between tables, past guests who turned and looked and registered surprise. They quickly rearranged into neutral expressions. She did not stop. She did not explain herself. She sat at table 3, and Nora was there, having positioned herself at the edge of the table like a small but committed guardian, and she handed Maggie her bidding paddle. Maggie took it. She bid on the 3rd item, a private dinner for 8, prepared by a chef whose restaurant had a 14-month waiting list. She did not particularly need a private dinner for 8. She bid because she was in this room and her number was registered and she was allowed to raise her paddle, and she intended to exercise every right available to her tonight. Claire sat across the table, watching with the expression of someone who was filing this moment away for the rest of their life. Conrad was on the far side of the room, near the back bar. He had not looked in her direction since she returned. She noted this without drama. He was managing the situation. Managing it meant not approaching her again, not escalating, letting the evening conclude without further incident. She understood his reasoning. She found it completely ineffective against the fact of her presence. Leonard Marsh came to her table during a pause between auction items. He was 70 years old and had chaired the foundation board for 6 years. He had known Conrad for 2 decades. He was a serious man with a tendency toward bluntness that Maggie had always appreciated. He sat in the empty chair next to her. "I want to say something to you," he said. She waited. "Lutham, you have been the operational foundation of this organization for 3 years. You see," he said. "The event structure, the donor relationship protocols, the community outreach framework. I have watched you build these systems. I have reviewed the materials you created. All of it is documented, attributed, on record." He looked at her directly. "Whatever changes may occur in this foundation's leadership structure going forward, your contribution will not be erased. I want you to hear me say that clearly." So she held his gaze. "Are there changes coming in the foundation's leadership?" she said. He met her eyes, without hesitation. "I think there may be." She nodded. "Thank you, Leonard." He squeezed her hand once, the brief, firm handshake of a man who did not trade in sentiment, but understood when a gesture was warranted, and he returned to his table. She sat very still for a moment. The auction continued. The auctioneer made a dry joke about competitive bidding. The room laughed. The band played something quiet underneath the proceedings. She looked at the centerpiece. Eucalyptus, white ranunculus, still flame. "I am good at this." The thought arrived without announcement, not as consolation, not as compensation for what she had lost or was losing, as a fact. She was genuinely good at building things. She was good at understanding what a room needed before anyone had thought to articulate it. She was good at the 1,000 small decisions that added up to an event that felt effortless to attend because the effort had been done invisibly before anyone arrived. She had built this room, this specific room, for this specific night, and tomorrow she would begin building something else. She pulled out her phone under the table. She opened her email. She typed herself a single line. "Call the Garnet District Leasing Office Monday morning." She sent it to herself. She put her phone away. She raised her paddle one more time before the auction closed. She did not win the item. She did not need to. By 11, the room had reached its final register. The auction was complete. The bar had softened from strategic to social. The formal architecture of the evening had relaxed into something warmer and more genuinely human. This was the part of large events that Maggie had always found most interesting. The 2 hours of structure and performance were over, and now people were just people, standing in a warm room with drinks, talking about things that were not about the foundation. She walked to the edge of the room. Sloane Whitfield was standing near the stage doors, alone for the first time all evening. She was looking at her phone with the particular expression of someone who was not actually reading what was on it. Maggie had not planned this. She walked over. Sloane looked up. Her expression went through several things in rapid succession before arriving at something careful and still. "Mrs. Ashford," she said. Maggie looked at her. "I don't expect—" Sloane began. "Then don't," Maggie said. A pause. The band played something from the next room, muffled by the door. Sloane said, "I want you to know that I didn't know you were pregnant when it started." Maggie considered this. She let it sit for a moment without reacting to it. "That makes it different for you," she said finally. "It does not make it different for me." Sloane was quiet. "I am not here to have a scene with you," Maggie said. "I am not here to make you feel worse than you already feel. and I am not here to perform my pain for you or for anyone else in this room. She paused. I want to tell you one thing, because I think you are young enough that it might actually be useful to you. Sloane waited. You are not the main character of this story, Maggie said. You may have thought you were for a while. That is understandable. Conrad has a way of making people feel like the most important person in the room. It is one of his genuine skills. She looked at Sloane steadily. But he was already building the next thing before this one was finished. That is how he operates. I did not understand that for a long time. I am telling you so you don't spend years believing you won something. Sloane's expression shifted. Something moved through it. Not tears, nothing dramatic, just the particular stillness of someone who has heard a truth they were not prepared to receive. I'm sorry, Sloane said quietly, and she meant it. Maggie could tell. I know, Maggie said. She turned and walked away. Not a performance, not a closing line designed for an audience. She had said what she wanted to say, and now she was done with that conversation, and she moved on. Claire appeared at her elbow within seconds, having witnessed the exchange from a respectful distance. Are you all right? Claire said. Yes, Maggie said. Get my coat. Claire already had it. She had retrieved it from the coat check at some point in the previous hour, with the quiet foresight that was one of her best qualities. Maggie put on the coat. She buttoned the one button at the top that still reached. She picked up her evening bag. She stood for a moment in the ballroom of the Wentworth Grand and looked at the room. The eucalyptus on the tables, the angled stage, the padded benches along the east wall where she had sat earlier, looking at the city, the warm light on the ivory linens, the low centerpieces that let people see each other. The room was exactly as she had planned it. It had been exactly what it needed to be all night. She turned toward the exit. She passed Nora near the service doors. The young coordinator was beginning the quiet work of end-of-event breakdown, moving through the room efficiently, checking items off a list on her tablet. Maggie stopped. Nora, she said. Nora looked up. When this event closes out, Maggie said, I want to schedule a conversation with you. I am going to be reopening my independent practice in the next few months. I am looking for someone to bring on, someone whose work I know and trust. She paused. I would like that to be you, if you are interested. Nora's eyes went very wide. Yes, she said. Just that one word, like a window opening. Good, Maggie said. I'll be in touch Monday. She walked to the coat check exit. She stopped once more. Conrad was across the room near the bar. He was talking to the same real estate developer from earlier in the evening. He was doing what he did best, standing in the center of a room that had been built to hold him, making someone feel like the most important person in the space. She looked at him. She waited for the sharp feeling, the grief or the rage, or the longing that she had expected all evening. It did not come. What came instead was quieter than anything she had anticipated. It felt like driving past a house you used to live in. You recognized the windows. You remembered the rooms. You remembered what it cost you and what it gave you, and all of it was true and real and permanent in the way that the past was always permanent. But you did not want to go back inside. That was new information. She stood with it for a moment, just stood with it, in her coat with the one button, in the room she had built. Then she walked out. The car arrived in 4 minutes. Frederick was driving. He had been waiting since she sent the text from the coat check. He pulled to the side entrance without being directed to it. He had learned her preferences over 11 years of driving her to events. The side entrance was quieter, less exposure, more efficient. She got in. The car was warm. It smelled faintly of the cedar air freshener Frederick kept clipped to the vent. She had noticed it years ago and had never mentioned it because it was not an unpleasant smell. It was just a consistent one of the small, unchanging details of a life she had been living alongside someone else's. Frederick pulled into traffic. Without speaking, the city moved past the windows. Lit windows in apartment buildings, a restaurant with fogged glass from the warmth inside, a couple standing at a corner waiting for a light. Late traffic, thin and purposeful. She called her mother. Dot picked up on the second ring. "Tell me something," Maggie said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. The television in the background had been turned off. Just quiet. "The Crow documentary had a second part," her mother said. "I watched it after we spoke. It was about Crow memory. They remember faces, specific individual human faces, for years, possibly for the rest of their lives. Good faces and bad faces both," Maggie said. Both, her mother said. But here's what the researchers found most interesting. The Crows who had survived the most hardship, who had lost the most, faced the most danger, they did not only remember threats, they remembered with equal precision every single person who had ever been kind to them. They recognized kindness as accurately as they recognized danger. It was stored the same way, with the same fidelity. Maggie sat with that. The city moved past. "I am going to be okay, Mom," she said. "I know you are," her mother said. "You have always been the kind of person who figures out what kind of crow she is." Maggie did laugh this time. It came out uneven and surprised and genuinely hers. "The baby kicked. She is active," Maggie said. "She knows something happened tonight," her mother said. "She was there for all of it." "Good," her mother said. She should know who her mother is. They said goodbye. She held the phone in her lap for a moment after hanging up. The car turned north. She was not going back to the penthouse. She had not consciously decided this during the evening, but she had texted Claire from the coat check that she would be staying at a hotel near the Garnet district tonight, and Claire had sent back a thumbs up and the name of the small hotel on Birchwood Street that they had stayed at together years ago for a friend's bachelorette weekend. Birchwood Street. She had not thought about Birchwood Street in a long time. She looked out the window and thought about it now. 3 weeks later. The apartment on Birchwood Street was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like the coffee shop 2 doors down, and the dry cleaners on the ground floor, and faintly, on certain mornings, like fresh paint from the apartment 2 units over, where someone was apparently renovating. She had signed the lease on the Monday after the gala. She had called the Garnet District leasing office at 8 in the morning, and they had availability in a building 2 blocks from her original office. Ground floor retail, 2nd through 5th floor residential, small units. Good light. She had taken a 4th floor apartment with east-facing windows. It was smaller than she had expected. She took it immediately. The portfolio was on the desk in the main room, brown leather, monogrammed with her initials in gold that had faded slightly at the edges, open to a blank page. She was not reviewing old work. She was adding new material. Notes from the call she had taken Thursday afternoon with a nonprofit arts organization in the north part of the city, a capital campaign, a launch gala in 11 months. They had heard her name from a board member who remembered a corporate retreat she had designed 7 years ago. 7 years ago. The work was still traveling. She sat at the desk and made notes in her particular shorthand and drank the tea that had gone cold and did not notice it had gone cold until she was halfway through this cup. The baby's room was half painted, soft sage green. She was doing it herself in sections between rest periods because she was 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant and stubborn, and because she had always believed that the space you built with your own hands remembered you, not sentimentally, just structurally. The way a room felt different when the person who made it was still present in its details. She had bought the paint herself at the hardware store on the corner. She had carried it up 4 flights of stairs, one can at a time, slowly, stopping at each landing. The man from the apartment down the hall had offered to help. She had thanked him and said she had it. He had nodded in the respectful way of someone who understood that sometimes having him now was the point. Her phone rang. Walt Bergstrom. "The preliminary filing is complete," he said. "The public conduct clause has been formally invoked. Your separate counsel has reviewed everything and is comfortable with the position." A pause. "The Foundation Board has also initiated an independent financial audit of the endowment accounts. Leonard Marsh submitted the request this morning. The USB drive contents have been reviewed by your counsel and are being evaluated for separate action." She sat at the desk with the open portfolio and the cold tea. "Okay," she said. "It is going to be a process," Walt said. "These things take time. There will be difficult periods. But Maggie," he paused, "you are in a very strong position on every front." "I know," she said. She did know. That was the thing that still surprised her sometimes. In the quiet of the new apartment, with the sage green paint and the east-facing windows, not the strength of the position, not the clause or the audit or the separate counsel, the fact that she had stopped being surprised by her own competence. She thought about what Francis had said. 22 years. I do not recommend it. She thought about what she had said to Sloane in the ballroom near the stage doors, with the muffled band playing through the wall. You don't want to spend years believing you won something. She thought about what she had said to herself in the hotel bathroom at the Wentworth Grand, standing at the mirror with cold water on her wrists. I know what I saw. I have known for longer than I have admitted. And then, later, lying on the hotel bed, with the ceiling above her and the baby moving against her ribs. If I do not have this marriage, I am still a person. She had said that to a hotel ceiling at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, and it had felt, at the time, like the most obvious thing in the world and also the most frightening. It did not feel frightening now. It just felt true, 2 months later. The Children's Hospital lobby was wide and bright with the particular deliberate cheerfulness of a space designed to calm people who were afraid. She had a consultation meeting with a hospital foundation board member about a fundraising campaign scheduled for the following fiscal year, a capital campaign. Significant scope. They had contacted her through Leonard Marsh's referral. She arrived 10 minutes early. She was sitting in one of the chairs near the main entrance, reviewing her notes on her phone, when the elevator bank across the lobby opened. Conrad stepped out. He was there for a board meeting. She knew this because the foundation still sent calendar notices to the shared account she had not yet fully separated from, and she had seen his name on the schedule 2 days ago and had not changed her meeting time. Because she was not in the business of reorganizing her life around his presence anymore. He saw her first. He crossed the lobby toward Hartbetwachem, and she looked up from her phone, and they looked at each other in the wide, bright lobby of the hospital with his name on the wing. He looked tired. That was the first thing. Not diminished, not collapsed, not destroyed, just tired. The specific tiredness of a person carrying the weight of consequences that had not yet fully resolved. He looked at her, at the baby she was carrying now, at her face. She waited for the feeling, any feeling. What arrived was something she recognized but had not expected so soon. It was the feeling of driving past a house you used to live in. You recognized the windows. You remembered the rooms. You remembered the cold open in November, and the cedar closet, and the kitchen island where he had held her hands and told her what she needed to hear. All of it was true. All of it had happened. All of it lived in her now in the permanent way that real things lived in you. But she did not want to go back inside. "Maggie?" he said. "Conrad," she said. A pause, brief and complete. "You look well," he said. "Thank you," she said. They stood in the lobby for a moment, two people who had known each other entirely and were now standing at the ordinary distance of people who did not. She did not feel rage. She did not feel love. She did not feel the cold clarity of the gala night, or the vertigo of the car ride, or the stillness of the hotel ceiling. She felt the same thing she felt when she looked at the society page photograph now. Recognition without longing, memory without belonging. "I should get to my meeting," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should get to mine." She nodded once. He nodded back. She walked toward the conference rooms on the north side of the building. He walked toward the elevators. The lobby continued around them. Nurses and families and volunteers and children and all the ordinary ongoing business of a place where people came when they needed help. She did not look back. She was good at this. That was the thing she had discovered, sitting at the desk on Birchwood Street with the open portfolio and the cold tea and the east-facing windows going gold in the morning light. She was genuinely good at building things. She was good at understanding what a room needed before anyone had thought to articulate the need. She was good at the 1,000 invisible decisions that added up to an event that felt effortless because all the effort had been spent before anyone arrived. She had built Conrad's rooms. She had built his galas and his annual reports and his public image and the framework of his foundation's community relationships and the event architecture that made donors feel like participants rather than checkbooks. She had done all of that, and she could do all of it again for someone else, for an arts nonprofit and a children's hospital and a capital campaign and whatever came after that and whatever came after that. For Nora, who had started 2 weeks ago and who already understood the work in the particular way of someone who had been doing it their whole life and just needed permission to call it that. The room she built was not the Wentworth Grand. It had never been the Wentworth Grand. The room she built was this: Birchwood Street, east windows, a portfolio open on a desk, a baby who would arrive in 3 weeks and would grow up knowing who her mother was. She turned back to the page. She started to work. The tea was cold. She did not notice. Outside, the city was its ordinary, brilliant self. Traffic and light and the coffee shop smell and someone on the street below laughing at something that was probably actually funny. She wrote 3 sentences in her notes, then 3 more. Then she stopped thinking about anything except the work. And the work was very good.
Maggie did not flip a table. She did not scream across a ballroom. She did not make a scene. She put on a coat that did not button. She got in a car. She walked into a room she had built. She sat at her own table. She raised her paddle at an auction. She told the truth to the woman in the dusty rose dress. And then she left. That is it. That is the whole revolution. And maybe that is the most important thing this story has to say. We spend so much time waiting for the dramatic moment, the confrontation with perfect words, the turning point that looks like a turning point, the transformation that is visible and undeniable and witnessed by everyone in the room. But most real transformations do not look like that. Most real transformations look like a woman sitting on a closet floor, turning a champagne cork over in her hand and deciding, quietly, with no audience, that she already knows what it means. Most real transformations look like cold water on your wrists in a small bathroom before you walk back into a hard room. They look like emailing yourself one line. Call the leasing office Monday. They look like offering a young woman a job she is ready for and has always deserved. They look like sitting in a lobby 2 months later and feeling nothing sharp. Just recognition, just memory, just the clean, solid knowledge that you do not want to go back inside. Here is what Maggie's story is really about. It is not about a cheating husband. Cheating husbands are not the story. They are the catalyst. The story is always about the woman who discovers, in the wreckage of what she thought she was building, that she is actually an extraordinary builder. She had built Conrad's world, his galas, his image, his annual reports, the rooms he stood in the center of. She had built all of it while telling herself she was a supporting character in a partnership. And the moment she walked into that ballroom and looked at her own work, the low centerpieces and the angled stage and the benches along the east wall, She understood something that changed the rest of her life. She was not the supporting character. She had never been the supporting character. She had just been building in someone else's house. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with this realization. It is not the grief of the betrayal. The betrayal is sharp and clean, and in some ways easier to process because it has a clear cause and a clear moment and a clear person to assign it to. The grief that is harder, the grief that takes longer and asks more of you, is the grief of seeing clearly all the places where you agreed to become smaller, not because you were forced, because you loved someone and you wanted to build something with them, and you kept saying yes to things that moved you slightly further from yourself each time, until one day you were sitting on a floor wondering how you got there. That grief belongs to you, not to him, not to the other woman, not to the circumstances. It is yours, and the way through it is not to assign blame, though blame may have its place. The way through it is to do what Maggie did on Birchwood Street, in an apartment that smelled like coffee and dry cleaning and fresh paint from the neighbor's renovation. You opened the portfolio, you turned